day two of the Future Print Virtual Summit, and we have with you here a really exciting keynote from Jonas Ridderstraling, who is one of the co-authors of Funky Business Forever, a seminal book published in the mid-2000s, which, as far as I'm concerned, was one of the key breakthrough books in business terms that enabled a real sort of vision into the future, which it seemed to encapsulate brilliantly the change that was taking place. And not only that, did it in a very entertaining, exciting, and frankly, funky way, as you'd expect. He has written books since this, of course, and is invited to speak all over the world at various different business events. And like many of us now, is speaking to the world from his home office, and which is, Jonas, I believe, is it in Stockholm?
Yeah, outside of Stockholm, on a fairly big island.
On a fairly big island just outside of Stockholm. So there we have it, a sort of a true European as well. This session is really going to set the tone. It's around leadership and adaptation. And without further ado, really, I'd like to hand over to Jonas now, and you're going to give us a bit of an insight into where you see the future going, and perhaps what we could adopt as business people going forward. Over to you, Jonas.
It's truly great to be with you all. Let's begin by imagining. Let's imagine that we could take the entire global market economy and place it underneath one of these huge electron microscopes so that we could look into the very nucleus of the economy. And you see, deep inside it, we would find a force called creative destruction. Now, creative destruction is a paradox. It is perhaps the ultimate paradox of progress. You see, as soon as we create something, per definition, we will also destroy something. Think about the little guy with electric hair, Albert Einstein. When he created his theory of relativity, he also destroyed, did he not, hundreds of years of research in the field of physics. All the old books by all the professors, their lecture notes, turned into dust by one little idea. And we see creative destruction all over the place. We see it in the world of politics, in the world of art, in the world of sports, but in particular, we see it in the world of business. So no wonder that during the last few decades, so many once great companies have been carried off to the business world's equivalent of an elephant graveyard. And everywhere you look these days, you see creative destruction happening in front of your eyes. Think back, so far this year, how many of you have bought a CD or a DVD? Think back just 5 years, and the situation looked completely different. Not only that, over the course of the last few years, we've even seen the birth of an entire new species of companies. Extremely asset-light organizations that really exploit existing capacity, all the capacity that is out there. The largest retailer in the world right now, it's the Chinese company Alibaba. And how many warehouses does Alibaba own? 0. The largest taxi fleet in the world, Uber, owns how many cars? Again, the answer is 0. Airbnb, how many hotel rooms do they own? Again, 0. An entirely new species being born as I'm speaking. Now, I guess we shouldn't be overly surprised, because if there's one thing that characterizes a market economy, it is, of course, that it constantly evolves. It goes up, it goes down, but it rarely stands still. And if we look back 40, 50, 60 years, two forces, more than any other, have driven this development. And of course, I'm thinking, number one, about digitization. And really, the event of COVID-19, from a digitization point of view, put us into a time machine, didn't it? because in just a few months, we basically got 10 years of development. We went to bed 2020 and we woke up 2030 in terms of the kind of usage we've only prior to that had been talking about. Now, if you believe that the last 20 years have been revolutionary, it's nothing compared to what will happen. Using existing technology alone, so we stop all technological development with existing technologies alone, in the next 30 years, we estimate that we can replace about 50% of all the jobs that exist in the United States of America. If we take a look at a country like China, we're closer to 80%. So we have not seen anything yet. Now, the second big driver, of course, I'm thinking about is globalization. And here, the coronavirus had the opposite kind of effect on our economy. It basically put globalization on a temporary hold. But again, if we look to 2050, some dramatic changes will have occurred. An absolute majority of the global middle class today still resides in the West, in Europe and in North America. But if we look 30 years into the future, the situation will have changed and changed dramatically, because by then an absolute majority of the global middle class will reside in Asia. And I happen to believe this is critically important, because the global middle class has a tendency to define what becomes dominant design. What is good, what is bad, what is right, what is wrong, what is beautiful, what is ugly. And historically, that has been the preserve of people in the West, but in the future, no more so. Now, creative destruction, of course, is not a new phenomenon. It's always been around. It's just that the speed with which the waves are hitting the shore has now reached unprecedented proportions. Now, so when we think about our competitive advantages, we can no longer think about them as if they were diamonds. They are no longer eternal. Instead, when you think about your competitive edge, think about it as an ice cube. It's still nice, shiny, glittery, but it's also extremely prone to melt. And if you do nothing or the wrong thing in an instant, it will be gone. So I believe our only chance of building an organization with the future is to build a company that has an evolutionary advantage, a company that has the capacity for self-renewal, an organization that changes before it has to. I'm going to spend the rest of my time with you talking about, so what are these fast forward, funky companies out there doing right now? The most innovative organizations in the world. Well, what are they doing from an organizational point of view, from a management and strategy point of view, and finally from a leadership point of view? Now, the first thing that is obvious when you look at these companies is that they're leaving behind the old idea of centralization. They no longer practice centralization. They no longer believe in the idea of concentrating power to just a few. And they're leaving this idea behind, I think, for a very simple reason. You see, it turns out that all human beings are becoming increasingly stupid. Now, let me tell you, there's good news and there's bad news, okay? So we can start with the good news. The good news you can see here, it's illustrated by the white line. It grows at a linear rate. It is there to capture the fact that over time, human beings actually become a little bit smarter. Now, we don't know why, but we can see it in the statistics. Over a 10-year period, average human IQ on the individual level increases by about 3 IQ points. The white line illustrates something that I guess many of you have been suspecting for quite some time, the fact that in all likelihood, you are a little bit smarter than your parents. It also suggests that with a very high level of probability, your kids will become a little bit smarter than you. Now, it may not seem like that right now, but we have to be patient, okay? So that was the good news. Now we can turn to the bad news. The bad news is illustrated by the red curve. As you can see, it grows not at a linear rate, but at an exponential rate. It is there to capture all the knowledge out there, all the books, all the gurus, all the stuff that you can find on the internet, the lot. And as you can see, it's growing at a much faster pace than individual knowledge. So whether we like it or not, there is a growing gap between what I know and what we know. Or put differently, we're all becoming increasingly stupid, relatively speaking. And this has a number of implications, not the least for business organizations. Because in essence, it means that the days are over when we could rely on a traditional, hierarchical, bureaucratic organization where a few people at the very top should take all the important decisions. And instead, if we look at the last 10, 15, 20 years, we've seen this dramatic growth of networks. Networks of many different kinds, many different shapes. But when you build networks in uncertain times, I think we need to look for inspiration elsewhere. Perhaps a few of you have tried internet dating, or maybe you have friends who have told you about internet dating. My friends have told me that in the world of internet dating, they use some pretty interesting acronyms, abbreviations. One of them is MBA, and it doesn't stand for Master of Business Administration. Instead, it stands for Married But Available. There's a slightly more active form as well, MBL, which stands for Married But Looking. And I believe this is exactly the kind of mentality we need as modern business leaders. Yes, I'm married to my current colleagues, I'm married to my current suppliers, my current partners, my current customers. But in addition to that, I need to be slightly more promiscuous. I need to find lovers and mistresses, options for a future that is so uncertain that you don't know really what's around the corner. And of course, this also means that we need to build organizations that are much more self-organizing than the organizations of the past. And self-organization boils down to utilizing the principle of 360-degree feedback. When human beings get feedback from all around, we have this tremendous ability to coordinate spontaneously and self-organize. But that also requires that we have a shared language, a shared grammar, that we have a shared definition of the key concepts that we work with in our organizations. Because without a shared language, you cannot really share information. Without a shared language, you cannot really survive without strict bureaucratic and hierarchical control. The second big shift that we're seeing in these hyper-innovative organizations is a shift away from another old idea. The idea that we can predict things and plan things and forecast things. Because the world out there is just too messy right now for that to work. We live in a world that is interlinked, connected to the hilt, technologically, politically, physically, economically. It's one big spider's web, and in that spider's web, COVID-19 is traveling, money is traveling, people, goods, and services. Now, if you have teenage kids, let me ask you, how much do they plan before they go out Friday, Saturday evening? Probably not a great deal. Let me tell you about my experience. My kids will go Friday evening, they will use their smartphone and they will go, I'm off. Now, I don't know about you, but when I was that age, I planned. Wednesday afternoon, I sat down with my friends and we planned and we discussed and we debated. And then we decided Friday evening, we're going to go to that place. And Friday evening, we went to that place. And let me tell you, even if it was boring as hell, we stayed, because you don't mess with the plan. That's the kind of heritage that we have. But today, planning makes less sense than ever. Instead, in an uncertain world, we need to experiment. We need to practice enlightened trial and error. And you can experiment with anything, not necessarily only technology. You can experiment with how you recruit people, how you remunerate people, how you put teams together, how you develop people, anything. We also know that experiments are risky. When you try new stuff, every once in a while you will fail. Mistakes will be made, rest assured. So any organization that aspires to be truly innovative needs to have some kind of idea about how they're going to deal with mistakes. And personally, I think we can learn something from the Army. I don't know if you've ever thought about it. In the Army, they actually consciously reward people who make mistakes. I know it sounds crazy, but think about it. You go to war, you lose half a leg, you come back home, and you get a medal. I mean, it was sort of a semi-strategic mistake. Maybe the next time you gather your troops, because there will be a post-COVID world when we can meet again, maybe you should hand out one of these, an MSU award, a Major Screw-Up of the Year award. Now, you'd be surprised how many really competitive and innovative companies already hand out such rewards. They usually call it something a little bit more politically correct, but it captures the gist of what I've just been talking about. And in many cases, it is actually the CEO who accepts the first reward because it legitimizes making mistakes. Not the same mistake over and over again, but they know that in order to succeed sooner, they will have to learn how to fail faster. In such a world, obviously, we will also need to redefine what management really means. I think it's fair to say that for about a century, we defined management as the art and the science of stamping out deviance, primarily negative deviance. But if we killed a couple of oddballs, weirdos, mavericks in the process, that was a sacrifice that we were willing to make in the name of professional management. Now, we did our very, very best to exterminate everything that was a little bit unique, special, and we created organizations that by and large in our neck of the woods looked like this. It's not exactly the kings of diversity that we're looking at right here, but things are changing now. Many of the most fast forward type of companies that we see out there, many of them, they, instead of stamping out deviance, actually try to leverage deviance. Think about Google and think about the former CEO, now Chairman Eric Schmidt. As CEO of Google, he had a span of control of 60 people. He had 60 direct reports. Now, why the heck would you have 60 direct reports? Well, do you think he's a control freak? We can ask him, Eric, why did you have 60 direct reports? Well, his response was, if you get enough direct reports, then you can't manage them. That was the goal. Think about it. 30, yeah, no problem. You can probably have 30, 40 if you stop sleeping and you drink a lot of coffee, but 60, it can't be done on purpose. He put himself in a position in which it would be impossible for him to manage and lead Google in a traditional way. Now, why did he do that? Well, I think he was smart enough to realize that in a world in which we're all becoming increasingly stupid, he is not smart enough. to hold all the answers to all the critical questions that will determine the future of a company like Google. Now, it didn't mean that he couldn't play an important role as a leader. He could, but it was a very different role. Instead of stamping out deviance, he had to create a platform for a debate, a discussion, where all the different voices of dissent could make themselves heard. But he also had to make sure that it was a debate, a discussion with a deadline. Leveraging deviance is so critical if you want innovation to happen. Now, from a practical point of view, how could you do this? Well, let me just mention one example here. Think about men and women and how men and women relate to risk. Now, which group tends to take most risk, the male group or the female group? Well, we all know, and there's like a library of research on this, that men on average take more risk than women. Now, with that little piece of information, I have an hypothesis. You probably remember Lehman Brothers. Well, if Lehman Brothers had instead been managed by the Lehman sisters, do you think we could have avoided some of the problems that the world is still struggling with just by leveraging that little piece of information to our advantage? The fact that we are different. Sometimes we want a lot of risk-taking, other times we want less. Now, the final big shift, I think, is a shift from a world of intellectual capital to a world of also emotional capital. For 2 seconds, place yourself in the intersection of increasing complexity out there in the world and growing stupidity here inside our minds. Now, when man no longer knows, what does man do? Well, I guess we can Google it, but truly, when man no longer knows, man believes. We believe in Brexit. We believe in Donald Trump. We believe in Greta Thunberg. The human mind, you see, is as much a belief engine as it is a thinking machine. And we love meaning. We loathe meaninglessness. And we're perfectly willing to fill in the blanks, to create meaning, to find a pattern that we recognize. Let me ask you, what are you looking at right now? I guess most people would say it's a face, but you don't really know anyone who looks like that. I sort of look like it, but I also have a nose. Or perhaps it is a British smiley. It has a stiff upper lip. But truly what you're looking at is, of course, only 3 circles and a straight line. But 3 circles and a straight line are meaningless. So we fill in the blanks, we create a pattern, we want meaning, it's a face. Now, smart leaders have always been really, really pragmatic about this. If people want something to believe in, you as a leader have to provide them with that so that they can believe in you, in themselves, in the work that they do, and in your organization. Therefore, in many of these hyper-innovative organizations that I work with, you find something that I've labeled a corporate religion, a set of beliefs that people can attach themselves to. And at the very core of such a corporate religion, you typically find a dream. And I happen to believe it's important that it is exactly a dream. There were solid reasons for why Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. once upon a time said, "I have a dream," and why he decided not to say, "I have a 5-year plan." Dreams are inspirational. They lift us up and they are extremely powerful, not the least from an economic point of view. Think about the United States of America, the powerhouse of the global economy during the previous century. Now, why was the United States so incredibly successful? Well, to me, part of the answer rests with the fact that the United States of America is not a nation state. It is not a country in the traditional sense. No, the United States of America is an idea. And attached to that idea, we find a dream called the American dream. Now, what is so interesting about that is the fact that we can all become Americans. I mean, it's a club, it's a movement. You can choose to be American. It may take a few years, but you can. How long do you think it takes to become Swedish? Let me tell you, I've done some research. It takes about 226 years if you're born in Denmark. For some people, it may take a little bit longer than that. Or Japanese. I work with a few Japanese organizations. I ask them, how long does it take to become Japanese? Usually quiet, but finally, not for me to lose face, one of them will stand up and say, Professor, in Japan is possibly, maybe, perhaps impossible. I mean, you cannot wake up tomorrow morning thinking, yeah, today I'm going to become Japanese. But I guess you can, but it's futile. You're either born Japanese or not. It's not something that you just decide to become. But we can all become Americans, even if you're born in Graz, in Austria. Before turning 30, you can move to the US, become a D actor, a C actor, a B actor, a Terminator, and then a Governator. You know what I'm talking about. It doesn't happen elsewhere. And I think as leaders, we need to ask ourselves the question, am I leading an idea? Do we have a dream, or do we settle for being just another company like all the others? At the end of the day, as a leader, you are responsible for providing not only your customers, but also talent inside with an emotional experience. And we've been pampering our customers, our clients for years. But think about, an experience is not an improved product. It is not an improved service. An experience is something beyond that. Think about a company like Harley-Davidson, well known for its customer experience. What does Harley-Davidson really sell? Some would say nostalgia. Others would say sound, because they sound quite different compared to a Japanese motorbike. But if we ask Dick Teerlink, the former chairman and CEO of Harley-Davidson, he says, really, what we sell is the ability. The ability? Yeah. The ability for a 43-year-old accountant to dress in black leather right through small towns and have people be afraid of him. Now we need to apply the very same reasoning inside our organizations and think about our emotional value proposition for talent. Some are probably thinking psychobabble, mumbo, jumbo, but then remember that research in neuroscience, brain research, is really clear in pointing out that the brain's limbic system, which is in charge of our emotions, always overpowers neocortex, where reason and logic rest. You see, the traffic instructions up here are obvious. Emotions first. Now, why do people get married? Well, I guess there are many reasons for getting married, but probably when I ask people, the most common answer in most parts of the world tend to be love. I fell in love, head over heels. Now, we use this little love criterion on more or less every important relationship in our lives. I mean, we love our football teams or ice hockey teams. We love our hobbies. We love our spouses, at least in the beginning. We love our pets. And if you can fall madly in love with a little schnauzer, shouldn't you be able to love your organization? So my question to you is, do you love? Not like, not fancy, do you love your company? Do you love your colleagues? Do they love you? Do you love your customers? And do they love you? Let's put it to a test. During the last 5 years, how many of you have ever encountered a colleague or a customer, for that matter, with your logo, with your brand tattooed on his or her body? Maybe that's the real acid test today, to build an organization with incredibly strong emotional switching costs. So here we are, in a world, of course, now affected by COVID-19, but also a world in which I think we must at some point in time ask the question, what is the last competitive advantage of man? When we get the full force of machine learning, artificial intelligence, augmented reality, virtual reality, all the stuff that will happen during the next 30 years, if we look at digitization alone, what role is there for us, for people like you and me? And I do believe there is a role. There are certain things that the machines do not understand. The machines do not understand context and the subtleties of context. How many of you have ever Friday evening heard the following statement? Honey, do I look fat in this one? And you're supposed to say, no, you look lovely. And the machine, what will the machine say? Well, the machine will go, compared to 32% of the population in your country, you are incredibly obese. Because it doesn't understand context. It doesn't understand the necessity of white lies. The machine does not understand emotions, generosity, goodness, all the great stuff that at the end of the day makes us human. Spontaneity, decency. So my advice to you would be to have a good future. Go out there and build relationship capital. Focus on the soft stuff, because today the soft stuff is the hard stuff. Go out there and good luck. Thank you so much for listening.
Thanks so much, Jonas. That was absolutely fantastic. I think you really said some really insightful things there around evolution, experimentation, experience, emotional value proposition. I loved the fact that you were breaking the rules, encouraging people to break the rules, screw up, and that the businesses really need to evolve and be evolutionary. So as well as that, diversity as well. And that's something which in the print sector at the moment, we're seeing a lot more of a push towards having more of a diverse set of people involved with business, because that provides the best possible outcome, as well as that reflects the world in which we're living. And as you've said at the beginning, it's not really 2020 at the moment, is it? It's actually 2030. So thank you so much. And I appreciate your time and input, and for setting us off on day 2 for the Future Print Virtual Summit.